Hello, students, and tonight we're going to look at lesson 2-5 on solving equations by adding or subtracting. In tonight's lesson, we have two main objectives. First, students will be able to solve one-step equations using subtraction, and secondly, students will be able to solve one-step equations using addition. All right, let's go ahead and look at the first warm-up. All right, it says simplify each expression. So number one, it says 3 plus 4 minus 4. So if you did order of operations, you do addition first here because it comes first and get 7, then minus 4 and get 3. Now I want you to do 2, 3, and 4, and I'm going to tell you this. You might see a pattern before you go that'll make them really easy to solve. So take a look at those and see if you can find it. Go ahead and do the warm-up now. All right, you might have solved each problem by, for example, number 2, doing 7 plus 9 is 16 and subtracting 7. However, if you look closely, there's a pattern in each one of these. They have a number, and then they do the opposite of it. So for number 1, they did plus 4, then they did minus 4. Again, if you have opposite numbers like that, those end up xing each other's out, xing or crossing each other out. So you would end up with 3. So if you look at number 2, well, we have a 7, then we have a minus 7. Those are opposite, so I'm left with 9. Number 3, I have 8 minus 2 plus 2. Well, the opposites here are minus 2 and plus 2, so I'm left with 8. And then number 4, same idea, I have a plus 2, then a minus 2, so I'm left with 6. So tonight we're going to look at how opposite numbers can be used to solve some problems. All right, so first I have an equation on the board. Y plus 2 is the same as or equal to 8. Now looking at this, you might know automatically, oh, I know what number I can throw in there. But I want you to wait for a moment. And I have this written on basically a scale below. I have the same problem. But instead of writing Y, I have a box. But again, I can write Y in there. So Y plus 2 is the same as or equal to 8. Now, when we do these problems, basically, I need to know what just this box is right here. Right now, I know what Y plus 2 is. So in order to find out what just Y is, I need to get rid of that plus 2. So how would I get rid of plus 2? Well, I would take away the 2. I do the opposite of it. So if you take away 2 from here, you're left with 6. So when you take away 2 from each side, you get Y is equal to 6. That's what we're looking at in tonight's lesson. And another way to think of this is using inverse operations, which are operations that really undo each other. So if I'm talking about addition, if I'm adding something, well, what would I do to take it away? Well, I'd subtract it. So the opposite of adding is subtracting, and the opposite of subtracting is adding. Same idea with multiplication and division. Well, the opposite of multiplying something is dividing it. All right, so here's a subtraction property of the equality. Basically, you can subtract the same number from each side of an equation, and it still makes those sides equal. That's why I keep using the scale. As long as you do something to both sides, your scale will be considered even or equal. So here I have Y plus 5 equals 13. And again, I could write this out. I do the Y plus 5, where the point 3 is where the equal sign is, and then I do 13. Well, to get Y by itself, what's on the same side? And you have this positive 5. So the opposite of adding 5 is taking away 5. And again, if you take away 5 from this side, you have to take away 5 from this side. Otherwise, the scale is uneven. All right? It's like a teeter-totter. You want it the same on both sides. So if I subtract 5 from both sides, I get Y is equal to, well, if you have 13 and take away 5, you should get 8. All right, and I can check this. I can put that 8 back into the original. So 8 plus 5 is, well, 13. That checks out. I'm supposed to get 13. All right, so we can do the same idea again. Basically, find your variable. That's your first step. Find your variable on each one of these. Then see what's on the same side and do the opposite of it. So again, we could do this next one together. I have here the number b plus 2 is 23. And again, keep in mind that teeter-totter. I look for my variable, which is b. All right, and I'm going to over the line it in b, or in green, my goodness. Now, what's on the same side? Well, I see the plus 2. Well, to get rid of that plus 2, I do the opposite of adding 2, which is subtracting. And the teeter-totter, if you do it to one side, you better do it to the other, otherwise it's uneven. So I'm left with b, plus 2 minus 2 are opposites, they cross out, is equal to 23 minus 2, which is 21. b is 21. And again, I could check it. Go back to the original. I'm saying b is 21, so 21 plus 2 is 23. Well, 23 is equal to 23. That checks out. Go ahead and do the next one. And again, it's a good idea to check your answer at the end. So whatever answer you get, put it in for x and see if you get the right answer. Or if it equals each other, then you know you have the right answer. Go ahead and do that now, so positively. All right, so if you were to do this problem, you have this number x plus 6 is 4. My variable here is x, so I'm going to go over it in green. And I'm looking on that same side to see what else is there, and I see that plus 6. Well, I need the inverse operation. Instead of adding 6, I would subtract it. All right, so I'm left with x, those cross out. This is equal to 4 minus 6. Well, if you have 4 and take away 6, you get negative 2. All right, and again, we check this out. I'm going to put negative 2 in, plus 6, and let's see what I get. Well, I'm adding integers, and one's positive, one's negative. When one's positive and one's negative, you subtract them. 6 minus 2 is 4. And let's see, 6 is a larger number, and it's positive, so my answer here is a positive. And there we go, it checks out. So for this problem, I should get x is the same as negative 2. All right, now I have a word problem with it. Larissa wants to increase the number of books in her collection to 327 books. She has 250 books now. Find the number of books she needs to buy. All right, some of you would probably just want to subtract. However, we're talking about algebra now, so let's set up an equation. We know she wants 327 books in her collection. That's the total amount she wants. All right? She wants the total number of books. Now, she already has some books, and then she has to buy more to get to that total. So now we have to fill in the pieces. All right? We know she has 250 books. All right? It doesn't tell us how many she needs to buy. It doesn't say it. So I'm going to put in a variable, and here I'm going to choose b. And now that's going to equal the total. Well, she wants 327 books. There we go. We just set it up as an algebraic equation. So now we need to actually solve for b. And again, the opposite. Do the opposite of what they're doing now. So I take a look at this. 250 plus b is the same as 327. Again, find your variable. And you can do this along with me. Outline it, darken it, whatever you need to do. Now, we look on the same side, so everything on the same side of it. So that's that 250. All right? Now, if there is no sign in front of a number, here it just says 250 plus b. All right? This number, if it doesn't have a minus sign in front, it means it's automatically positive. So to get rid of this 250, we need to subtract it. All right, and if you subtract it from one side, you subtract it from the other. And let's see what happens. Well, I'm left with that plus b is equal to, well, 327 minus 250. And I'm left with 77. B is 77 books. And yes, you should have a label on these ones because it is a word problem. All right, so now we're going to look at the addition property. On those other problems, we've been subtracting each time. But the same idea occurs. You can add the same number to each side of an equation, and that equation is still considered balanced. So here we have c minus 23 is the same as negative 40. So I could write this out again on my scale. My variable here is c. Well, and I have minus 23 on that side, and that's going to equal negative 40. So again, I want to get my variable by itself. And if I look on my scale, this is all on one side with that c. All right, and they say c minus 23. Well, if I want to get rid of those negative 23 marks, I'd take each one off. I'd add 23. So if I do that to one side, I do it to the other. So you'd add 23 to both sides. Because if you look above minus 23, well, the opposite of minus 23 is plus 23. All right, and you're left with c equals, well, we have negative 40 plus 23. We have a negative and we have a positive number, so we need to subtract those two. 40 minus 23 is, well, 17. Then I look, 40 is a bigger number, it's on top, and 40 in the original was negative. So c is negative 17. There we go. And again, you could check this. Put negative 17 in for c and check it out. So if I have here negative 17 minus 23, well, they're both negative numbers. If they're both negative numbers, that means you add them together because it's just going to get more negative. So negative 17 plus another negative 23 is a negative 40. And that's what it's supposed to be. So that checks. Now I want you to do the same with this one at the bottom here. Y minus 5 is the same as 8. So go ahead, again, find your variable, do the opposite of what they're doing to that number on the same side, and go from there. Go ahead and pause this video now. All right, so I'm going to look and I see in this problem I have y minus 5 is the same as 8. My variable here is y, and on the same side of that y is minus 5. Well, the opposite of minusing 5 is adding 5. So I do that to both sides. And I'm left with y is equal to, well, 8 plus 5 is 13. So I get y is equal to 13. Then I check it out. I'm going to put 13 in for y. 13 minus 5 is 8. So I know my answer checks out. All right, so y is equal to 13. All right, and here again we have another word problem. And I think I want you to try to set up the equation this time and then try to solve it. Marcy's CD player costs $115 less than her DVD player. Her CD player costs $78. How much did her DVD player cost? So, we know how much her CD player costs. We know that her DVD player was more expensive because her CD player cost $115 less than her DVD player. So go ahead and try to set this up, and then when you're all done, let's check it. So go ahead and pause me now. All right, so to set up this equation, let's see. We know we're going to talk about our CD player and our DVD player. Well, her DVD player, we don't know what that costs. But we know, basically, that her CD player, we know that it was $115 less would give us the price of her CD player. All right, so because we don't know what this is, I'm going to use D minus $115 is the same as, well, her CD player costs $78. So again, if you take the cost of a DVD player, take out that $115, it leaves you with that $78. That's how much your CD player costs. All right, so we need to solve for D now. And again, I think I want you to solve this. So if you already solved it, just keep going through the video. However, if you haven't solved this yet, I want you to pause me now and solve it. So go ahead and pause me if you need to. All right, so let's check your answer. So we need to solve for D, so that's the one we need to get alone. On the same side of that is at minus $115. So the opposite of minusing $115 is adding it. So I add it to each side, and I'm left with Z, and those cross out, is equal to $78 plus $115. Well, if I add those together, I get $193. All right, let's make sure my answer is correct before I move on to the next piece. So if I say the DVD player was $193, and if I subtract that $115 from it, let's see if I end up with my cost of $78 for that CD player. So 13 minus 5 is 8, 8 minus 1 is 7. So there we go, they match up. So I know for a fact my DVD player costs $193. And now we're at the end of our lesson. What I want you to do for tonight's lesson, or the check your understanding piece, is for 1, 2, and 3. I want you to take a look, and you don't actually have to solve those. Just I want you to tell me what you would do. So for number 1, what would you do to get y by itself? What would be your first step? All right, so you found out what the variable is y. So how would you get that all on its own side? What would you do? All right, so for example, I'll help you out with number 1. I see it's y plus 8. Well, to get y by itself, I would subtract 8 from each side. All right? Go ahead and do the same idea with number 2 and 3. However, be careful with both of them, actually. There might be a little bit more you have to do. So go ahead and solve those, or tell us what would be your first step. All right, for number 2, now it really depends on how you would do this. Some people would say, oh, I'd subtract 7 from each side. Then I would go ahead and add 21. If that's what you would do, that's fine. I know some people instead might say, oh, well, 7 and negative 21 are basically both constants. I can put those together. So instead you'd end up with f, well, 21 minus 7 is 14. That 21 is negative, so it's negative 14 equals negative 20. So some people would put those numbers together first and then say, oh, I'd add 14. That's how I get f by itself. So it really depends on how you looked at it. So you might say, oh, I'd subtract 7 and add 21 to both sides. Or you might have said, oh, I'd put those numbers together and then add 14. Now, number 3, 67 is the same as g minus a negative 36. Again, the whole idea here is when you have 2 negatives in a row, you turn it into a giant plus sign. So now what would you do to get g by itself? I'd subtract 36 to both sides. That would be your answer. All right. And I think I'm going to stop you here. That's the end of your lesson. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night.